Today's case involves a graduate from an MBA program at UCLA. Very bright individual, very astute at making money. And he figured out he could make a lot of money in the marijuana cultivation business. He got into it and he did very, very well at it. Until one day he got ripped off. And that made him very mad. And two people ended up dead. And then he had the problem, what do you do with dead bodies? Where do you bury a dead body on the way to Vegas? Well, we're going to talk about a case in which the FBI got involved in it and eventually solved the case. And you're going to learn how such a bright, smart guy did some pretty dumb things. So look at the facts. What were the facts?
Well, what's our topic about today? Murder on the road to Vegas. The Sean Wong and the Benjamin Franson case. Well, what's it all about? Well, it involves two young men from Israel who came to the United States. In particular, we're going to be talking about Ben Würzberger. He came out, a year and a half earlier. He had been a disc jockey in Israel, but he wanted to learn more about the finer points of being a disc jockey and get into the music business. So he came to Hollywood, got an apartment, and started living out here, and he started working at various clubs, being a DJ. And he was enjoying it, and he invited his friend, Adar Neiman, that he had known since school, and he came to visit him. Now, Adar wanted to be a disc jockey as well, but didn't have the time to come out to the United States to study about it. So the two of them, they leave Israel at various times, come to the United States, and that becomes the issue of our case. They're here in the United States, and their mothers never hear from them for weeks. Now, they always were in contact with their parents, and when the parents weren't hearing from them, they got very concerned, and they wondered where are they and what has happened to them. And that was when the two mothers joined together, and they hired a private investigator to check out any information that investigator could come up with as to where their sons were. So they hired him, and he found out that Ben's car that he had purchased and was using turned up abandoned in Vegas. And about the same time, Adar's credit card was being used at various spots in Vegas. Now, the private investigator gives that information to the mothers, and when they checked into it more about Ben's car in Vegas, it had been abandoned, just left on the street there. The keys in the car, luggage in the car. It looked like somebody was setting up to have it stolen, but the police came along since it was parked on the street, and they towed it away. And that's when they learned that it was Ben Würzberger from Los Angeles. Well, what did this all mean? Well, nobody knew. And it was parked about a block away from the Strip in Las Vegas. Now, as we know, the old saying, what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. There's a lot of truth in that. However, we couldn't figure out, no one knew why that car was in Vegas abandoned. Now, we have that information that Adar Neiman, his credit card, was used at Best Buy to purchase a number of computers. It was eventually turned down because it didn't go through, but it did go through on an Outback Steakhouse dinner. I think it was about a $150 dinner. And why? What did that mean? Why was his credit card being used in Vegas? Now, the mothers, are very concerned. After receiving all that information, they both fly to Los Angeles, and they go to the Los Angeles Police Department, and they put in missing persons report on their sons. And the police say, well, where were your sons living? And they said, Well, we don't know. Their friends indicated that they were on their way to Vegas, that they had left their apartments and place where they were staying in Los Angeles. And the police department said, wait, just a minute. We're not going to file a missing persons report because obviously they've left Los Angeles and they most likely are in Vegas. And they said, well, you go to Las Vegas. That's where you would file any missing persons report. So the mothers, they go all the way up to Las Vegas, and go to the police department there, and they go in and say they want to file a missing persons report. And the police there said, well, where are your sons living in Las Vegas? Where do they have residence? They said, well, we don't know. We were just told that by some witnesses in Los Angeles that they were planning on going to Las Vegas. Now, the Las Vegas police said, no, we're not going to take a missing persons report. You don't even know they arrived in Las Vegas. So the mothers didn't know what to do. No one from law enforcement was going to investigate their missing sons. So in frustration, they come back to Los Angeles and they go to the FBI building where their office is out in Westwood. And they go there and they say, our sons are missing and no one is going to investigate. We want somebody to investigate it. Well, the FBI agent who met with them, tried to explain. The FBI is basically deals with white-collar crime, fraud, a lot of things with the banking industry, whenever a federal agency is involved. But, the other part of the FBI is fugitive warrants, meaning when somebody leaves one state, goes to another state, the FBI will look for that person. So those are the main things, but very seldom do they do any homicide cases because that's done locally by the local police departments. Well, after the mothers begged and pleaded, one of the agents, said, okay, reluctantly said, okay, we'll look into it. And so they did. They checked out the car, that Ben's car that was in Vegas, and they couldn't find any clues as to the boys being associated with it because it was just parked on a vacant street about a block from the strip. Now, as far as Adar's credit card, they wanted to find out where it was used and check with those merchants to see if they could identify either one of them. The next thing the FBI did, one of the agents checked about Ben's cell phone. And when they checked it, they noticed it had been used, but there was a lot of calls to and from a person by the name of Sean Hong. And so they became interested. Who's this Sean Hong? Of all these phone calls by Ben to him. And so they got a search warrant for the Sean Wong's phone. They got all sorts of information from that he was in contact with a number of people who were in the marijuana business. So after they examined his phone, they learned that there was a location in Canoga Park on DeSoto Boulevard, and something was going on there. And what was it? So they went out to check on that location, and this is the house. This is the house that all these phone calls, were dealing with. And they learned when the FBI went out there, this was more than just a house. They also learned that that was an address that Ben Würzberger had given his mother, that he was living there. And then when they checked with the owner of the house, they found that Sean Wong had leased it. He had leased that house for a year. So that was a connection, and it was an interesting place. And there was, in the living room, there was a hot tub in the living room. And obviously there was a lot of parties, socializing with young ladies. So a lot of things were going on in this little pink house. And the question was, the FBI wondered, who's this Sean Wong? They found out he was a graduate student at UCLA's Anderson School of Business. He was At the time, getting his MBA, and had just received his degree as an MBA from UCLA. Very bright, one of the top students in the business school. And one of the things that Sean had learned was about supply and demand. And he was one who wanted to make a lot of money. He was going to be good at business. And so he got this place in Canoga Park, and he learned that the most profitable thing that one could be involved in is marijuana, cultivating and selling marijuana. So he got this house, and he was going to use it to grow marijuana plants. And this is his idea was no one would suspect that marijuana is being grown in this house. It's just a residential area of middle-class houses. So it was a perfect location for putting a pot farm in. And what he did, he took the layout of that house, and he used the rooms in the back, the 2 bedrooms in the back, and converted them into growing rooms. And he had, plumbing put in there, so there was water to water the plants. He had lights put in so that they would grow day and night. So a lot of work went in, and it's what you call pot in pots, and that's what he grew there in those back bedrooms. Now, to prevent law enforcement to learning about it, he put in a false wall there. You can see that's what it looks like. And if law enforcement came in there, they wouldn't know anything about there being back bedrooms, and that pot was being grown there. So it was well disguised and well hidden. So a lot of marijuana was being grown in those back bedrooms. Now, when the FBI started interviewing people that knew Sean Wong, there were several guys. There was the guy called the plumber guy and the Russian guy who did a lot of work setting the place up. And when they talked to him, they learned a lot about Sean Wong that was kind of revealing that, he was the one who was the mastermind of setting up this pot farm in this house. And they did all this work for him, and they got paid from him to set up those bedrooms as growing rooms. Now, what happened was after they had growing a lot of pot there, one day a lot of it was missing. And that was after Ben had moved out. Ben had left, and Wong was really mad. He didn't know who had ripped him off, but he had a suspicion that it all happened after Ben left. Because when Ben moved out of the house, he had said that he was going to go to Vegas. He was going to go up there to certain clubs to do DJ work. So this was what the FBI learned. And another name that kept coming up when the FBI was talking to these friends and these plumbers and Russian men was Benjamin Franson. And he was one that hung out with Sean Wong. Well, what are they going to do? So there's no body. I mean, we don't know about any homicide. All we know is that Würzberger and his friend Ador disappeared. So we don't have a homicide case. We don't know what has happened to him. So the FBI gets a search warrant. They do a search warrant on that DeSoto house in Canoga Park, and they found a sword. And everybody always talked about Sean Wong had this big, like a samurai sword. And so they got it, and they checked it out, and there was no blood on it, no nothing. So that wasn't something that was going to be evidence to show a homicide. Now, they decided to take statements from Sean, and they did. And he told the agents, I suspected Ben had ripped me off, and I wanted him to pay back, and he agreed he would pay back. But I had nothing to do with his disappearance, and I never went to Las Vegas. So those was basically what he told the FBI agents. And his friend, Franson, the FBI agents tracked him down and they talked to him. And he said, the house with the victims. And there was a little bit of an argument because Ben said, Ben owed him money. And Wong got real mad at him, and there was a rough, and then he killed him. Well, that kind of surprised the agents as to, so then he said, well, as to the other guy, Ador, he ran into my arm, and that's how he got killed. Well, then the agent said, oh, well, okay, now, what happened to their bodies? Where are their bodies? If they got killed. And he said, in a strange way, Francis said, if I were looking for those bodies of the victims, I'd be looking along the freeway to Las Vegas. Okay, now what does that mean? And the agents asked additional questions. He said, well, I would look for a building with a blue roof with a WW or, dot computer symbol on the top. Okay, so they didn't know what to make of that, but that was the only information that they had as far as what might have happened to the two victims. So the FBI decided that they were going to take that route of the freeway from Los Angeles to Las Vegas. And they're going to look along that way to see if they could find any place that had a building with a blue roof and a .com sign on top. And so how are they going to do it? Well, they decide, they contact the highway patrol and say, well, look, you patrol that area. Do you know any building like that? And they said, no, we don't know of any. But why don't you jump in our helicopter and we'll fly you up there along the route. And we'll look for any building with a blue roof. And the FBI said, okay, we will. And they got in the CHP helicopter and they took off from the Los Angeles area. They got up to the Barstow area. Then at Barstow, they started going along just above the freeway, and they get to this point. It was, quite a few miles up, and they looked down, and they noticed as they approached this, it was called Afton Canyon Road. There it was. There was a building with a blue roof, and it looked like a real estate office, and on top of that roof was a www.jeffchris.com. So that must be it. So they said, okay, now they turned off because they said that Francis said there was a campground somewhere off from there, and they saw a sign that said Afton Canyon Campground. So that was when the FBI got ground units to go out to that location. And they did. When they got there to Afton Canyon, they found, it was a isolated campground. It was back, nothing was around there. The only thing was there was a railroad track and a trestle and a dried up creek bed. And there most likely was about 50 campsites along, it was a very pothole, a lot of rocks in the roadway. So they went there, and there was only one camper there. Everything else was abandoned. Nobody was there. And they drive all the way through, and they start looking. Francis said, well, if I were looking for the bodies, it would be somewhere, in this campground area. But where? And the agents got out, they scanned the area, they looked at every campsite, they looked at every square foot to see if there was anything indicating a grave site, and there wasn't. There was nothing that they could see. So what are they going to do? It was getting late, and the sun was about to go down, and one of the agents there said, I had a case where there was a cadaver dog. We used a cadaver dog. And so they said, okay, let's do that. And they called in to see if they could get a cadaver dog for the next day. And they did. They got, they said, we'll have a cadaver dog out there first thing in the morning. And they did. All the agents regrouped there early in the morning, and sure enough, a trainer brought this cadaver dog out, and the dog started, sniffing around and went from one campsite to another campsite, and didn't seem to be coming up with anything. But then the dog crossed all the way over to that cul-de-sac area to the last campsite, and he went all the way past the campsite uh, behind some bushes, uh, kind of a hidden area in the back, and he started sniffing, and then he started barking. And the agents didn't know what to make of it. This has been going on for about 2 hours, and then he starts digging. And the dog is digging in the sand there, and continues to dig in a real rapid digging motion. And one of the agents goes over and gets a shovel, comes over and starts digging where the dog was trying to scratch. And the sand was quite soft there, and they noticed that the roots were broken. And why would there be broken roots there? And so they kept digging, and what does it mean? Well, then all of a sudden they came across duct tape, some duct tape, just a little strip of duct tape, didn't mean anything. And they continued to dig, and then they came across a shoe. There was a shoe, and it seemed strange. And then at that point, the agents thought, oh, well, this must have been a dump site. Years ago, they must have dumped things in here. It's just trash. But they dug a little around that shoe, and sure enough, it was connected to a leg. And then when they dug more, it was a body. There was a decomposed body on top of another body. It was really a gruesome discovery. Now, was that the two young men from Israel? Well, there was no identification. They had clothes, but there was no wallet, nothing to indicate who they were. So what the agents did was they collected the bodies, they contacted the coroner's office, and the coroner's office comes out and the bodies are removed, taken to the coroner's office for an autopsy. And in the meantime, the agents had contacted the Israeli military and asked for dental records. And they got dental records, and sure enough, it turned out these were the bodies of both Ben Würzberger and Adar Neiman. And now they knew they had a homicide. The FBI, what are they going to do about it? As to Franson, it was a little easier as to him because he had admitted that he was there in the house when Würzberger was killed by Wong. And he also said that Adar ran into his hand and was killed. And he kind of gave the description as to where the bodies would be buried. So the case as to him was a lot easier. However, when it came to Sean Wong, what evidence did the FBI have against him? Well, he didn't make any statements that were really incriminating. He said he had a beef against Würzberger, but that was pretty much it. So how is the FBI going to make a case against Sean Wong? Well, they considered his cell phone. His cell phone was important, and they wanted to get the records as to his calls with Franson. And that could show the motive to kill Würzberger. And did he have an opportunity to kill Würzberger? Well, they wanted to get the cell phone tower records, meaning where did Sean Wong make all these phone calls? And they wanted all these cell towers because the cell tower indicates, within so many, maybe 100 feet, where that phone call was being made. So it was very important to get the tower records, and they're kept for 90 days. So the FBI made a request on March 3rd to get it, and the phone calls were made on December 3rd. So that turned out to be 92 days. 92 days. All the tower records are destroyed, deleted after 90 days. So what happened? They're not able to get any tower records, meaning where the phone was used. So that was a big disappointment. However, they still could get the phone records, not the tower records, meaning they could find out, as far as Sean Wong's, what phone calls he made and the numbers he called, meaning who he called, but not the location where that phone call was made. So now that was all they had to work from, and I put this together. It was a timeline showing the phone calls that were made between Sean and Franson, and you can see that there were no phone calls at the time that the victims were killed. This was the time that other witnesses indicated that Wong and Franson were alone with the victims. And the other time was during this period of time, which is the time that they dug the grave and buried the bodies. So the only two, otherwise they were in constant phone contact with each other because they were in two separate cars. Sean was driving his car, Franson was driving Würzburger's car. So they were making all these phone calls back and forth to each other as they were driving up this route to Las Vegas. As I say, the only two times they were not making phone calls was during the killing and during that time that they were digging in the campground to bury the bodies. Now, eventually, we know that they get to Las Vegas and they have Adar's credit card. They've killed him, they've taken his wallet, they take his credit card, and so they want to use it up there to make it look like that they had arrived in Vegas. So they take it to Best Buy to use it, as we already said, to buy some computers, which was rejected. However, they went to the Outback Steakhouse to use it there. But the one that turned out to be the most beneficial was they had used it at a clothing store called the Cat Walk. It's about 2 blocks from the strip. And they went in there and they purchased these items, pants, shirts, shoes, and a belt. What was interesting about it, what they were able to do was corroborate when they returned to Los Angeles after being up in Vegas. What were they wearing? Sean Wong was wearing, as well as Benjamin Franson, the exact items that had been purchased from that Catwalk store in Vegas. So this corroborated that they were the ones who used Adar's credit card in Vegas. As far as parking the car, we wanted to have proof that were they the ones who parked the car there. Well, they couldn't come up with that, but they could show that they had called friends in Los Angeles, and they indicated to those friends that they were in Las Vegas at a hotel and they were going to go do some gambling at the casino. And that was precisely at the time that the car was seen being parked, and there you can see exactly the street that it was parked at, where that red circle is. So now we know they are in Vegas at the exact time that Würzburger's car is parked on the street. So they had the opportunity to park the car in Vegas, even though Sean Wong said he had never been to Vegas. All right, now I get involved in the case in a kind of a strange way. Carla Curlin was assigned the case, and it was a handoff to her. It couldn't be tried in a timely fashion because this defendant, Sean Wong, said he would not waive his right to a speedy trial. he demanded to go to trial, and the person who had prepared the prosecution of the case was not available. They were trying another case. So Carla got the case, and then she contacted me and said, Ron, could you help me out, work on the exhibits? And I said, okay, I'd help her out. But I asked her for a summary, and she said, well, Ron, there is no summary. This is an FBI case. And I said, well, I have to have a summary of the facts so I know what it's all about. And I said, well, then set up a meeting with the FBI. And she did. And we met with the FBI, and I asked for a summary, and they said, well, we don't do a summary. Well, I'd worked on hundreds and hundreds of homicides, and there's always a murder book. All police departments do a murder book, and everything is laid out in that murder book by categories, by the coroner's reports, the witnesses' statements, the evidence found, interviews. Everything is categorized, so it's easy to find everything in there. However, the FBI does not use a murder book because they don't do that many homicides. And there's no way of finding things because all of the reports by the FBI are done in a chronological fashion, meaning the only way you can find them is if you know the date that they were done. So what it turned out, I had to turn to the agents, and they were great. They were very, very helpful in being around and giving me the documents I needed because they knew the dates that those documents were prepared. So I organized the case. We didn't have much time, did it very, very quickly. And the case was being tried out in Van Nuys Court, and I'm downtown Los Angeles. So I had the exhibits, everything prepared and sent out to Carla, who was trying the case out there. And I put this together so that the jury would understand the relationship of the parties. Who were the defendants? Who were the victims? And who were the witnesses? Because that was a lot of names that the jury is going to have to know about. And if they got them mixed up, they would never have an understanding of the case. The other thing I put together was a summary of the case. I wanted Carla to be able to argue to the jury, these are all the facts. This is the evidence that all points to Sean Wong as being the killer. So she used this in her argument. Now, as far as the defense's strategy on the case, Sean's parents paid, it said, like $500,000 for his defense. And it was vigorous, and they fought tooth and nail. And the one thing the defense attorney indicated is that the DA was misleading about an audio tape that was played to the jury. The DA had said that the statement made on the tape was, "You're right, I did," referring to his involvement in it. But the attorney said, no, that he said, that's a lie. And, the prosecutor said to the judge, well, wait, he's making those statements. Let's play the tape. And the judge said, okay, we'll play the tape. And they did play the tape in front of the jury. And sure enough, the defense attorney was wrong. It isn't the word, that's a lie. It's very clear that he said, you're right, I did. So that was one of the turning points of the case at the end during argument. However, Sean Wong was so confident that he was going to beat the case, he had made reservations for dinner that night for his girlfriend and his mother at the most expensive Beverly Hills restaurant. That was how confident that he was going to be released from custody because the jury was going to find him not guilty. Well, the jury considered those timelines that I had prepared. That turned out to be the crucial factor. They looked at it, they realized, oh, you're absolutely right. That is the vacant calls between the two is when they were doing the killing as well as when they were digging the graves. So that provided the opportunity to killing and digging graves And that was very convincing to the jury. And the jury returned a verdict of guilty of the first degree on both homicides. Now, and as he's walking out, being escorted by the bailiff out of the courtroom after being found guilty, he, yells or says to his girlfriend, I guess that means we're not going to need those reservations at the Beverly Hills restaurant tonight. Well, he was right. He wasn't going to need those reservations ever at the Beverly Hills restaurant because he had been convicted. And several weeks later, even though he said he was definitely innocent of the crime, he was sentenced to 25 years to life. So in other words, he's going to spend the bulk of his remaining years in prison. Now, as to Franson, his case was tried a little bit later, and you remember he made the incriminating statements. He kind of they wanted to indicate that he wasn't that much involved in it, but then he took the witness stand and he convicted himself. He just got tripped up on the evidence, and he basically got himself convicted of first-degree murder. And between the two of them, he took his up on appeal, and it was reversed. Franson's case was reversed. Sean Wong's case went up on appeal, and it was not reversed. That meant he got a second trial, and the second jury found him guilty of second-degree murder. So he was sentenced to less time, 15 to life. Now, I just want to bring you up to date as to the locations. This is at Pink House out in Canoga Park. It's still there. It still looks pretty seedy, but there's no marijuana being grown outside or inside that pot house. And this, I went up to the Afton Canyon campground just to show you where the graves were. And of course, nobody knows if that is the hole where the graves were. It's starting to sink. With all the weather and the rain, you can see an area where the land is kind of sinking down where the graves were built. So that is the end of this case. And just think about it, these young lives. Young people who had so much to live for, and they all ended up as losers. Every one of them lost either their life or their livelihood of being free and spending the rest of their young years in state prison. What a shame. What a loss to all of them.
Well, hopefully you found this case interesting. And if you want to know more details about it, get my book, Killers on the Road to Vegas. Well, hopefully you'll join us again for another True Crime Files podcast when we'll talk about another case. Examine it from the beginning all the way to the courtroom proceedings. See you then.